Now, TOCHUKWU, how much of revenue concerns should we be having? Because Nigeria right now, whether we like it or not, we're facing a revenue challenge. Some will say we're in a revenue crisis. Though that the tax authority said that they made so much money last year, over 5 trillion naira, and they intend to even make more this year. That means that they need to tax a whole number of Nigerians tax more people. But for revenues, I think Nigeria just got a sultry amount of 2.7 trillion just last year. And we have a lot of things that we need to use money for. So how much of revenue crisis or revenue challenge is Nigeria facing right now?
I agree with you. You know, when people say that our debt is actually not an issue because we're still within the allowable limit of, presently we're about 17.5%.
We are not even up to 40% yet. I think the threshold should still be.
I think it's about 25%.
Yes,
so for developing countries, about 25% for a country like Nigeria. However, I think that rather that's a wrong variable to use or ratio to use. I think we should be looking more at our debt to revenue ratio, which is abysmally low. When you realize, for instance, that in this, you mentioned 2.7 trillion last year.
2017 or so? Yeah.
2017. Yeah. And then you look at the deficit this year. Well, what we're expecting is about a 1.83 trillion deficit. However, for the 2019 budget, the revenue expectation is about 6.97 trillion, which is usually not realized anyway. If we just realized 2.7 last in 2017. If you look at the debt, the debt service for that year, it won't be much different from it will be much lower than that 2.7 trillion. And so what you have is that we're spending 80–90% of our revenue to service debt. And so that's where the problem is. So rather than looking at the debt to GDP ratio, we should be looking at the debt to revenue ratio. And then coming back to your question of whether we have a revenue challenge, that's a big challenge we have as a country. The revenue is very, 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 very low. And because of that, the government has been borrowing a lot. I mean, our debt stock has risen from about 63, almost $64 billion in 2015 to about $73 billion now.
Let's just nairanize it, about
22 trillion
Right.
currently. And that's huge. That's huge because the revenue is not meeting up at all. So why is the revenue not meeting up? First of all, we have the oil price slumping. Now the 2019 budget is at risk of not being implemented because the benchmark oil price that the National Assembly got is about $60 per barrel. Whereas as we speak already, depending on which of the oil you're looking at, the Brent is about 59, while the Bonnet Light is about 61 point something. And so you look at that, and this is just the first month. We don't know what's going to happen going forward. It's true that OPEC is trying to cut production, but that's also affecting Nigeria. So when you look at the revenue challenge from the point of view of oil price, and you also look at it from the fact that OPEC has also cut Nigeria's production to about 1.7 million barrels per day, from what was anticipated in the budget of 2.3 million barrels per day, you see that we're actually in a lot of trouble. Then you couple that to the fact that, like we mentioned, there isn't power, there isn't stable power, and stable power is one of the main ingredients you need for production.
To boost production.
Production would not happen if you don't have power. And if it happens at all, the cost is going to be excruciatingly high. When the cost of production is very high, the competitiveness of domestically produced goods will not be there, will be low. And when that happens, people are going to produce less. The government, the tax revenue government would have gotten from company income tax, from personal income tax, from VAT will be much lower. And so you see that we are almost in a vicious circle in terms of revenue. So, well, the hope is that the government will really push in terms of implementing the ERGP, especially with regard to what it was mentioned there, setting up, establishing those industrial clusters, also establishing the crop export crop processing zones, and then also especially with regard to power, what it says about power.
Okay, I'll come back to the views I'm getting on Twitter in just a while, but in 30 seconds, with this political risk that is happening up and down, especially with an August suspension and all of that, what does it tell an average Nigerian and an average Nigerian investor, as well as an average foreign investor about our institutions? Very quickly.
Oh, they're very weak. They're very weak. If the head of one arm of government can unilaterally remove the head of another arm of government, then what the investors, both domestic and foreign, will look at is that, well, investments are not safe here because anything can just happen. Due process is not respected. When you hear that, okay, the NJC was involved, the National Assembly was involved, the presidency was involved, you see that there's a little bit more consensus. People are going to be a bit more comfortable. But when those kind of things happen, it sends a very wrong signal that our funds are not safe in Nigeria.
Okay, let's take this comment. Kem Osai Miligu says, the political stability of a nation is directly proportional to its economic growth. Right now, it's not looking great by any indices. Nwafo Obina says, we need to move from that point to a point where the state of the economy can indeed affect politics. In this situation, the people win. This can be achieved when citizens begin to thoroughly engage political actors across board. I think he's making sense here, isn't it?
Yeah.
Where we begin to interrogate and ask questions and allow hold these political actors accountable.
Yeah, and I think that's what Nigerians are expecting to see. You have seen the enormous outcry of Nigerians since this happened on Friday, and we've also seen the international community also reacting. But what's to be seen now is, okay, in addition to the talking, what happens? Is the NJC going to sit today? And if they sit today, what actions are they going to take? Are they going to take back their, independence? What is the national, the bar going to do? What's the NLC going to do? What are the civil society organizations going to do? Not just in terms of telling the government, look, you cannot go outside the constitution to take decisions or to do things, but also in terms of telling the NJC you have to stand up and actually do what you're supposed to do, even if it means disciplining your own chairman. I think Nigerians are beginning to see that, well, we cannot leave it all just to the politicians. We have to also begin to take
our nation in our hands
and then take action.
Okay, just as we end the program, how optimistic are you about this year's growth? The International Monetary Fund has revised Nigeria's growth forecast about 2.2%. Last week at the MPC, the central bank governor did say, oh, he's optimistic about the economy this year. Are you optimistic with all these people, with all these situations around?
The revision of the growth, I think, was actually to 2% from 2.3%. And that's already because of what we're seeing, that even that 2.2%, which is abysmally low, 2.3%, which was already abysmally low, cannot be achieved given what we're seeing. I'm actually not as optimistic, because if we were able to grow at 1.9, and we're not even sure if we'll get up to that in 2018, with all that is happening with the elections, yes, there's going to be increased spending in this last few weeks to the elections, but then it's not going to be in the capital expenditure space. I see a situation where the capital flight is going to affect the economy. I see a situation where there will be a mild increase in inflation, which will also have impact on the growth and the real growth now. I see a situation where the government also will be distracted is already distracted by the elections and the politics around it, to not give sufficient attention to the economic reforms, which would actually bring about that 2.2% growth.
Yeah. There would be, political activities come February, March, April, May.
And don't forget that when the new government enters, it will take some time to...
So before we even get ourselves
we're getting to September.
towards the end of the year. Yeah.